So let's start with this legend. This is a Big Island legend. And there are several variations on this legend. And so in kind of choosing through them, I did a bit of a mix and put them together. But there's a number of different sources for this. The story is about a shamanic figure. In old Hawaiian tradition, the shamanic figure, the name for that type of person was kupua. And kupua is often portrayed as a trickster, and but sometimes a magician, sometimes a person who goes into other worlds and comes back, a person who can change shape, a person who does a lot of the things we find in shamanism around the world. The Hawaiian idea is a kupua. And the trickster part, they usually two kinds of tricks. One is to trick people into getting well. And the other one, I have to say this, Maui, who was the most famous one, would often go up into the realm of the gods and bring the gods down a peg or two. Okay? He loved to play tricks on them, which got him into a lot of trouble, but that's another story. This story is about a figure, a character called Kana. And Kana is a word that means, now when we're listening to Hawaiian stories, and I'll bring this out, paying attention to the meaning of the place names and the meaning of the personal names makes the story a lot richer than simply hearing them as words. So Kana means beyond compare. And he had stories also about his brother. He'll come into the story, but I'll mention his name. It's a curious name. In one source, his name was translated as sand crab. I can't find any reference anywhere to this word. Niheu is the word, meaning sand crab. But there's another meaning which is more pertinent to the story. It's somebody with an unusual hairdo. Yeah. So anyway, we'll get to that part of the story. So once upon a time, a long time ago, way before Captain Cook, the most beautiful woman in the world lived in Hilo. And she had 11 fine, strong young boys. She was married to another chief, she was a chiefess, and she was married to a chief called Akka. And her name was Hina. Now, just as an aside, Hina is the most popular, most well-known figure in all of Polynesia and in Micronesia, all throughout the Pacific, one of the oldest characters. And so, depending on the story, she could be a wife, a mother, a sister, a grandmother, a lover. In this story, she's first of all a wife and then a mother to these children. So she actually, although I said she had 11 fine children, she actually had 12. But the 12th one was born in the form of a rope. And so he was tossed away on the crash heap. But his grandmother, Hina's mother, was called Uli. And she knew that this was not just a rope, this was a very special being. This was a kupua child. Now, another little aside here. You'll often hear when they're talking about kupua children, you'll hear them being born in the form of a rope. What does that mean? Why a rope? Well, Hawaiians, like all Polynesians, love plays on words. And the play on word here is that if you slightly change the pronunciation, instead of saying kaula, you say kaula. It's a little different, okay? But nevertheless, close enough to make a play on words. Kaula means a magician. And so one of the same meanings as kupua. So to be born in the form of a rope is kind of like a code word for here was a kupua who was born. And often they're abandoned and raised by somebody else. Actually, in old Hawaii, they would have been sent to somebody else to be raised. That makes a better story, to say the least, because that gives some tension in the story as it was come to. At any rate, He was brought up by his grandmother, Huna, up backcountry behind Hilo. And as he grew up, he was her servant, took care of her and did things for her. And in the process, she was teaching him all about his powers, but without formally teaching him. She was simply giving him opportunities to use them and develop them as he grew up. So he grew up to be a fine young man. And about this time, there was a chief on Molokai, a very arrogant, you could even say evil chief. His name was Kapepe'e Kauila. I made it 2 words, but Kapepe'e Kauila. Now, here we have a curious word too. It actually means the twisted Kauila tree. And so the twistedness there, the Hawaiians had this idea of crookedness and twistedness as meaning something bad, meaning something not good. So he was twisted. He was very, very arrogant. And he decided one day he had to get married. But for him to get married, he was powerful too, but for him to get married, he would have to marry the most beautiful woman in the world. So he sent out his bird messenger. One was Kolea, which is the plover that comes to the islands. And another one was Ulili, which is on the shoreline. It's the tattler, is the English name for it. But anyway, these were his messengers. So he sent them all over to find the most beautiful woman. They were very fast because these were spirit birds. And finally they came back to him sometime later and said, "We have found the most beautiful woman in the world. Her name is Hina, and she lives in Hilo." He said, "Oh, okay, well, I'll just go over and get her and have her for my wife." The bird said, "Wait a minute, she's already married." And the chief said, "Oh, Pilikia, no problem. I want her, I'll have her." He says, "Well, also, she has a lot of people who love her, so there's something you should know about her. She loves to swim alone on the first night of the month." You know, the Hawaiians in the old days had a lunar calendar. So they measured the days by the nights, actually. And the first day of the month, the first night of the month, was called Hilo. And that's not in the dark of the moon, that's when you have the very, very first sliver. That's Hilo, the first night. So Hina, and it's mostly dark out, but Hina would love this. What she did was she would swim around the island of Mokuola, which, if you're from this island, is the island in the Hilo Bay. That used to be a healing island. That's why it's called that. It's called Healing Island. That's the name of it. So anyway, she would love to do that. So the chief got in his canoe and sailed over here to the big island, and he had his strong warriors with him in the canoe, and he waited out in the ocean until the night of Hilo. And then he came in very quietly, so quietly, using some of his magical powers so Hina didn't hear him. And just as she was swimming around the outer side of the island, out of sight of the land, he swooped in with his canoe, and his warriors grabbed her, and they took off for Hawaii. No one knew where she went. So, of course, when she didn't come back, and no one could find her, everybody was in an uproar, and the chief, Akka, was sending people everywhere to try and find her. But one person who didn't go out looking was her youngest son, not counting Kana, her youngest son, Niheo. And so Niheo sat and he looked into a fire. Remember, I said he was a tool. So he looked into a fire, and in the fire, when his father came up and said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I found our mother. She was kidnapped by the chief of Molokai." "Oh, well," Akka said, "Well, just go and get her." He said, "No, not a good idea." Because he's not only a very powerful chief, he has a huge amount of very powerful warriors, bigger army than we have and more powerful, and he lives on a magical hill that nobody can attack. So he says, "There's nothing we can do." And so Chief Akka was, going into despair. Well, Uli heard the news and decided this was the time to introduce Akka to the world. I mean, not Akka, Kana. To introduce Kana to the world. So she waited until there was a contest going on down at Hilo Bay. They used to have one of the contests they would have in the old days was a contest of fish lifting. They would get this big fish, maybe it was a tuna, but they would get a big fish in the bay, and then they would see who could lift it. Remember, she had 11 strong children. Niheu was strong, but he was smaller than the others. Anyway, 10 of them tried to lift this fish, and they couldn't lift it out of the water. And Niheu came, and he was just barely, with his superpowers, barely able to get it out of the water, but he couldn't hold it for very long. So about this time, Uli had sent Kana down to the coast. And he looked, he didn't know really what was going on. He didn't know it was a contest. He just saw that there was a fish in the water and these people couldn't lift it up. So he just walks down, picks up the fish, puts it on his back, and starts walking back to his grandma. Wow! First of all, this was a contest that was only supposed to be for the sons of chiefs. Second of all, he outdid everybody. That got his brothers very upset. So they ran after him, they grabbed him, they took away the fish, they called him a thief, trying to steal the fish, they tied him up. And so he's standing there, and his grandmother comes down, Uli. And Uli says to Kana, she looks at him, he says, "What are you doing? Stop fooling around. Come back home." So he just bursts all the ropes and walks back and follows around the hill. Okay? He didn't know what this was all about. So Niheu realized there's something very special about this guy. So Niheu followed him. There follows, after that, a really long part of the story that we're not going to tell. We're editing. Okay? Keep it within reason. And anyway, he followed him and eventually learned that Kana was his brother. Then he had the idea, well, the two of us with both our kupua powers should be able to go and rescue our mother. So Kana said, great, because now he knew who his mother was and who his family was. Let's do it. So just the two of them went in a canoe, sailed all the way over to Molokai. Now, as soon as they got to Molokai, the chief was ready for them. He started sending out his warriors. But Kana was extremely strong and very, very fast. And so Kana was battling all the warriors and taking care of them. And Niheu snuck around, tried to sneak in and get his mother. And just as he was about to reach in and rescue his mother, those messenger birds came flying down out of the sky, landed on his head, plucked 5 hairs out of his head. And that's where all his kupua powers resided. And so he got weak and failed and couldn't get his mother. You find a lot of the stories where the powers that someone has reside in a piece of clothing or a stick or some part of their body. For him, it was the hairdo. Now, this special hairdo was a kind of hairdo that was, you see, on one of the rituals they used to have, when certain of the kahuna pule, the priestly kahunas, would come out and they were presenting the statue of a god. Sometimes if they had to travel, they wouldn't bring the statue with them, because a particular statue might be too inconvenient. They would bring someone along to represent the god. And this would be a man who had a very elaborate hairdo that was plastered with red clay. We find a lot of Polynesia, the redness meant sacredness. And the top of the head was the most sacred part. And so this one person would play the role of the god as they traveled. So obviously Niheu had this kind of hairdo. So he must have had this role in the community. So anyway, it didn't do him any good because they plucked out his hairs and lost his powers. So Kana comes up. Kana had meanwhile gotten rid of all the warriors, except the ones that were right close in the chief's compound. And so he comes running up to get his mother, and just as he comes running up, boom, the hill gets higher and too steep. And Niheu, who can see with clear vision, says, the hill is actually a giant turtle. And his name is Kahonu Nui. Oh, goodness, right? I got that one. I almost got everything, but I got that one. Okay, Kahonu Nui Maeaea is his name. It means great rising turtle. That was his power. So Kana had the power to stretch. So he stretched up, and the hill stretched up, and he stretched up, and the hill stretched up, and he stretched up, and the hill stretched up. So Kana's about ready to give up. He tried all the 5 forms that he had. These are called kino lao, many bodies. First he tried it as a human. That didn't work. Then he tried it as a banana tree, and that didn't work. Then he turned into a morning glory vine, and that didn't work. The hill just kept getting out of reach. Finally, he tried it as a spider web and almost succeeded as a spider web, but that didn't work. And we're just in despair, almost ready to give up. He suddenly receives a vision from his grandmother, Uli. And she tells him in this vision, the secret is in the turtle's flippers. That's where its power is. Break the flippers and you break the power. So Kana, being very, very strong, immediately paid attention to that, reached over and stretched horizontally, broke off the flippers of the turtle. The whole hill crumbled and fell down, and with it, the evil chief and all of his remaining warriors. And at the last moment, Kana reached out, grabbed his mother, rescued her. They got in the canoe and sailed home. And Hawaiian stories have this too. Everybody lived happily ever after. Now, let's look at some elements of the story. In terms of the topic for tonight, in case you didn't read it, is using your brain, not using your brain, using your mind for a change. Okay. So let's look at some of the things in the story. We're going to do this by following the principles of Huna that we teach. Huna is the name of the philosophy. It means esoteric knowledge. And there are 7 principles that we use as guidelines. They're not laws, they're just ideas that are very useful. So this first one says that the world is what you think it is. Now we see that right away in the story. Okay. First of all, we see it where it didn't work too well for him, except most of the time the chief had the idea that the world was his. Okay. And he acted that way. And convinced a lot of other people by acting that way to go along with it. When we look at it another way, now look at what happened to Niheu. In Niheu, he thought that certain things were just too hard to do. So when he looked in the fire and he saw this magical hill and he saw the great warriors and he saw the power of that chief, he gave up. Even though he was a Kapur with magical powers himself, oh, that looks like too much to me. See, that looks like too much to me. That was his opinion. That's the way he saw the world, so that's the way he behaved. Now here comes Kana. Kana didn't think of anything like that. Kana didn't think anything was impossible because he didn't know any better. And so he only thought of one thing. What am I going to do now? And how do I do it? So he just kept going in that way. And this will come up again when we talk a little bit further. But each of these people in the story, even Hina, remember, she gave birth to a rope. Well, that can't be any good, so she abandoned it. And Uli had her own point of view. That's a magical being, so she raised him as one. And they all had this influence within themselves and the people around them, but mainly on themselves and what they thought they were able to do and not able to do. And we have this in our own life as well all the time. We look at a situation and we make an opinion about it, and then we act as if the opinion were truth. And sometimes our opinions are really good, and they have good effects, and sometimes they don't. But what we forget very often is they're just opinions. And when we act as if these ways we have, these decisions we make about the way things are, good and bad, and important and unimportant, possible and impossible, then we try to start treating those as true in the way things are, and that's one of the best ways to get stuck. We're doing it with our own mind. We're the ones who decide whether something can be done and whether it cannot be done, whether it's good or bad, possible, and so forth. Who knows what's possible until we try it? We'll get more on that later. But when you immediately start off and say it's impossible, you block yourself from trying. And That's something you do with your mind. It's a decision you make about the way things are. Now we have another principle here. The principle says that there are no limits. And since there are no limits, anything is possible. But see, this is a very practical philosophy. Sure, anything's possible if you can figure out how to do it. So just because it might be possible to jump off a cliff and survive doesn't mean you're going to be able to do it. Unless you know how, unless you've got some skill or talent or knowledge or technique or parachute. There's probably a way to do what you want to do, but just because you can think of doing it, the next step is figuring out how to do it. So this is very practical. The limitation there is not intrinsic in the nature of things, it's only in your mind again. And maybe it's knowledge you need, it's skill you need, it's help you need. Because remember what we had. Even Kana, with all his powers and abilities, reached the point where he made a decision that I can't do this. And all that meant, really, even he forgot. All that really meant was, I don't know how. So at that point, he got the inspiration. We'll talk about ways of getting inspiration. But anyway, he got the inspiration from his grandmother because they had such a close rapport. And she told him how. Suddenly, what he thought was impossible was no longer impossible. Because now he had some knowledge. And now he knew what to do. One of the most fabulous things about this particular life is the amount of knowledge we have available. It's awesome what we have available today. And a lot of it is through technology. But I can tell you, for me as a writer, one of the most delightful things in the world is to be writing a book or an article, pausing, bringing up Google, finding exactly what I need to know, and then coming back and continuing. Because, you know, I'm old school. And that means that I used to actually, at the beginning, type my books. And keep notes on 3x5 cards. And if I came to a point in the writing of the book where I needed some information, I had to stop everything, go to the library, search through all the books, hopefully find that they had a book which had some information that I needed. So I had these great big stacks of books. And sometimes discover that, no, they didn't have it, but the library in New York did. Then I might have to wait 2 or 3 weeks for that book to arrive before I can continue writing. The process today is so amazing. We have so much available, literally at our fingertips. Well, this means that we're able to, if we go seeking for knowledge that we need, or knowledge that's useful, we can do it so much faster. We can accomplish what we might have thought was impossible so much more quickly. We can take our time if we want to, but the possibility is there for doing it more quickly because we don't have, how can I put it, our apparent limits have expanded tremendously. And more is possible because more and more knowledge is available. Now there are ways to get knowledge we'll talk about without having even to go to Google, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, basically there are no limits. Now we come to one of the really important things here about using your mind, and that is what we call the third principle, which says energy flows where attention goes. Energy flows where attention goes. Wherever you focus your attention, that's where your energy goes. Your mental energy, your emotional energy, even your physical energy will move in the direction of where you keep your attention. Now, here's another point of decision making. Are you going to focus on what you want, or are you going to focus on what you don't want? Because that's going to make all the difference in the world. And so many people have developed, because of their environment, the way they grew up, or who they grew up with, or what the society was like locally where they were, where they start thinking about everything they don't want. And we call that, in English, we have two terms for this, okay? One of them is regret, and the other one is worry. And we also tend to forget what worry really means. The word comes from the behavior of a dog. And when a dog grabs a stick or a cloth and shakes it back and forth without doing anything with it, just shakes it back and forth, that's called worrying. Okay? And the word then began to be applied to what people did with their minds. Except you forgot where the word came from. Okay? It just means going back and forth to no purpose. Okay? So, here's something that will give you a little new take on this, okay? When we put our attention on something that we want, we become tuned in to what in Hawaiian we would call an Akka field. Now, an Akka field is a pattern of behavior that exists, composed of memories. The word Akka in Hawaiian may possibly be related to the word Akasha in the Sanskrit, but if it is, the people of India borrowed it from the Hawaiians. Nevertheless, it's a very similar word with a very similar kind of meaning. It's a fundamental, it's not really matter, it's a field. Okay? One of the words means sparkling light, meaning dark shadow, okay? Not in the negative sense. So, if we want to look at this scientifically and use a scientific word, there is a scientific theory out now called morphogenetic fields, or morphic fields, proposed by a man named Rupert Sheldrake. Anybody's heard of him? And it's very, very similar to the Akka fields. So here's the idea. When you focus on something, let's say that you want to do or you want to learn, you are also focusing or tuning into the existing field of all the other people who have done that. But depending on your focus, if you begin focusing on how hard it is or how difficult it is or how impossible it is, you start tuning into the Akka field of all those people who decided the same thing. And it's not only the opinion that you have that's kind of floating around, you become entrained, you become almost dragged into the field of people who say it can't be done if you don't do anything about it. Now you have the possibility of doing something by changing your focus. It's amazing what that does, the feeling. When you're thinking along negative lines and you suddenly stop and say, no, I'm going to think this way. There's not only a change of shift of thought, there's a change in your body. That if you pay attention, you feel lighter. You feel different. And you just make that shift on purpose. There's something very powerful about doing that. And it's not just powerful that it does something, it's powerful in its feeling and its effect on you. When you're focusing on something you really want with the possibility of doing it, then you're tuning into this field. If it's already something you know, then you quickly start to tune into also the ideas about it that other people have had. So one form of meditation, you could call it that, which simply means focusing on something, is thinking, how can I do this? Not can this be done, but how can I do this? If you just sit with that with your mind, ideas will start to come in. You won't know specifically where they're from because they're coming from the field. And you'll start to get ideas about it. Sometimes I'll sit in front of my computer. Now, the more you know information you have about something, the faster this works. So I'm fairly familiar with computers, and sometimes I'll just computer will stop and I'll say, what can I do now? Not, oh, what can I do now? No, that's different. What can I do now? And I'll just sit there quietly. And I'll get an idea or an impulse to do this thing or press this key. Just had a computer go out, so I'll show you how practical this can be. Went dead suddenly. Well, I've had enough experience with computers to know that one possibility is the power supply. That'll happen. So I assume that's what happened, because it was plugged in and everything seemed good, just bam, black screen. So I had arranged for somebody to come up and help to look at it, save my data on the hard drive at least. And then I started thinking about this, and I let these thoughts kind of grow for a couple of days and say, could it be anything else? If it were something else, what could it be? And I woke up one morning, not purposely thinking about it, but I had tuned into possibilities without purposely even realizing I was doing that. And I woke up, and the thought that came to me right when I woke up was, try another outlet. Well, that's very unusual because, it's a new house practically that we live in, but okay. I got up, doesn't cost anything, stuck it in another outlet, boom, there's the computer. Everything worked fine. When we really want to do something or know something or get involved with something and we just keep it in our focus, not with a lot of effort, but just keep it in our focus. Ideas, inspirations come to us. They may be exactly all we need at the moment, or they may lead us to other things. For example, how many people have been in a time in your life where you really needed some guidance? You walked into a bookstore or the library and a book fell out, practically fell on you, sometimes actually. How many have had that experience? That's exactly what I'm talking about. So many of you. Now this is modern age, so how many have ever turned on the radio or the TV at just the moment when somebody was saying something extremely useful for you? How many have had that? Yeah. Almost the same number. This is exactly what I'm talking about. When we have something on our mind that we need or want, information begins to flow because you're tuning into that field. When we're focusing and trying to learn something we've never done before, well, the field is out there, but tuning into it takes usually some more effort. But I'll tell you what the key is. The key is information. The key is to learn as much as you can about the thing that you're interested in and immerse yourself in it as much as you can, which means maybe listening to tapes, listening to even TV that is focused on that particular subject, reading a lot about it, whatever. You need information in your memory that allows you to tune into the field. And when you start doing that, the learning starts going faster and faster and faster. What we're finding out today, when people are talking about the amazing children who are being born. Yes, they're amazing because they're being born into fields that enable them to learn much faster than we did. And the longer these things keep up, the faster the next generation will learn. I'll give you a different theory of how that works. Okay? And there have been a lot of experiments to show that this kind of thing actually happens. So using your mind here is to use your mind to focus. Now, let's go back to Kana. I said Kana practically gave up when he was finally couldn't stretch anymore. He did not give up trying to reach his mother. He just didn't know what to do next. But he didn't give up with the idea. He didn't back up and go home and say, let's forget her. Okay? He stayed there, and that's when the inspiration came. Oh, try breaking the flippers. And with that, he was able to rescue her. If you'll keep the focus, and if you have enough information or experience with the general field of information that you're trying to get attuned to, inspiration will always come. when it's involved with your life purpose or what to do now, or a problem with a relationship or your health, it doesn't matter what it is. There are fields out there of people who have successfully dealt with what you're interested in. The more you can tune into them, the more subconscious help you'll get with what you want to do. Now we say that now is the moment of power. Let's take care of this. Now is the moment of power. This very important thing in the Hawaiian language, as I've taught a lot of you already, you know, the Hawaiian language itself has no past tense and no future tense. It's a very, very present moment language, and language guides the way we think. We don't have to learn Hawaiian to do this next thing, but it's useful to remember that here is where our power lies, in the present moment. And when there's a problem, it's the present moment where we have to start finding solutions. We can take information from the past, which exists now as memory. We can take expectations about the future, which exist now as expectation, but there isn't any future for practical purposes. And the past is over and done with. We're not even in the same point of space where things happened before. Study a little astronomy. Okay. Yes, does the past affect us? I would say no. What affects us are our memories of the past and our opinions about those memories. That's what affects us. And you can change that with your mind. How you think about the past, what you do with that information, that's a choice, that's a decision. That's in the present moment. So somebody asked me once, how can I get more into the present moment? You know, people say that a lot, you know, be here now. It sounds very beautiful. How do you do that? Well, one of the things that we, as an organization, we specialize in is how to. It's very simple. The way to come into the present moment, you want to come in, I've been talking about your mind a lot, but what we've got to realize is mind and body. When the two of those together, wow, you're immensely powerful. Far more than just mind alone or body alone. So here's a way to get into the present moment very quickly that helps you relax, get centered, and bring your mind and body together. I'll take you through it. It's a very simple little exercise. There are lots of variations, but this is a simple one that some of you know already. Just right where you're sitting right now. You don't have to go into any kind of deep meditation. Take a deep breath, but when you inhale, put all of your attention on top of your head. When you exhale, put all of your attention on your feet. Just try that for a few moments. Now, after you've done that, you're more in the present moment. You're actually, all your auras have gotten brighter, but I'll talk about auras another time. But it brings you into the immediate present so quickly. Because the way to get into the present is with your senses. Consciously with your senses. Sight, sound, touch, taste, hearing, smell, any of the senses can be used to bring you back into the present. When you're involved with a problem of some kind, when you're feeling kind of frustrated or maybe helpless or worrying or something going on, you're scattered, you're confused, this technique we just did is called Pico Pico. If you just stop and breathe, you don't even have to remember Pico Pico. Consciously breathe. This helps you focus a little better, but consciously breathe, it brings mind and body together immediately. Now things start to calm down, mind begins to clear, body begins to calm. Now you can go back to your problem and deal with it far more effectively. Far more effectively than when you're lost in the tension and confusion. So come back to the present moment. There's power there. That's what our principle says. Now is the moment of power. Now we get into the next one. The next principle, it says, to love is to be happy with. To be happy with someone or something. And here in this terms of what we're talking about is to be aware that love is the primary motivation that moves everything, let's call it forward. Okay? In greater harmony, greater happiness, greater effectiveness. It's love. You have to love something enough to move. We call it motivation. Okay? You can come up with all kinds of specifics, but it really simply has to be something that you love in order to do something. Now, Kana had just found out he had a mother. He wanted to know her, and his mother was in trouble, and he wanted to help her. That was a very strong motivation. That's why he got in the canoe and went over to the island and did everything he could to help. That's why his brother went too. Because not only could they do something, they would do something, and the love was strong enough for them to actually start doing it. But what they loved was something good. They didn't act out of fear that she would be hurt. That doesn't work. Or it works very poorly. They acted out of something that they loved. Something that they thought was good enough to do something for, to change for, to move toward. And it's the same way in all the things that you want. You want to be healthier? Then there ought to be something about being healthy that you love. The word health is an abstract. You want to dance, you want to jump up and down, you want to climb mountains, you want to jump out of an airplane. What do you want to do that you love? Now, that's a good motivation for being healthy. You want to be, what? Spiritually developed? Okay. First of all, you got to decide what that means to you. Because if you don't know what it means, you're never going to get there. First of all, you got to decide what that means to you, and then love it. I remember a Zen story comes to mind. A lot of good Hawaiian stories, but this was a Zen story. And this was wanting to become one with the Buddha. That was the aim. And so this student came to the Zen master and was trying to do this and trying and just wasn't getting anywhere. He got really frustrated with the master, with the teachings, and with everything. So the master says, "Come with me." They get in the boat. They went out into the lake. The master threw him overboard and held him down. He just held him down, went on and 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 on. Finally, he let him in, began bursting up. The master says, "What did you want most?" "Air!" "When you want the Buddha that much, you'll discover it. There's got to be something you love to really move in the direction or to the place or in the way that you believe is good. So love is so very important with this thing about using the mind. And it consciously cultivate it. Because if you say, "Well, of course I love that," well, you're diminishing the power. Consciously cultivate. We say that all power comes from within, and all power does come from within, but it's the power of spirit that comes from within, however you want to define that. It's not your personality, or your body, or even your mind alone. It's the whole of you, and the extension of you, and the connection through you that has all the power. And that power comes through by using it. It's not enough that it's there. You've got to give it a direction, a purpose, a channel for it to express. When you do that, the power starts getting stronger and stronger. Now, it's not that the power gets stronger. It's infinitely strong right now. What gets stronger is your ability to channel it, use it, tune into it. Because the power is already there. And again, this is a conscious idea, this is a conscious opinion, a conscious decision. There is power. Now, some people will say, "Well, how do I know there is?" Forget that. Decide there is. Because there's no way to know in what's usually called a scientific sense. There's no way to know anything without any doubt whatsoever, because it's possible to doubt anything whatsoever. It's the point at which you simply stop doubting. And people say, how do you do that? Stop it. Okay? People become afraid of feeling fear and afraid of being aware of doubt. And I'm here to tell you from experience and through this tradition, don't be afraid of fear and don't be afraid of doubt. But when they come up, stop them. Turn away from them. Don't play with them. Okay? And you'd be amazed at how fast they'll disappear. And I don't mean suppress. I don't mean suppress, because if you suppress, that takes tension and they don't go away. I mean, just say no. What? I'll tell you a little story. A good friend of mine. The first time I met him. And he came into my, first of all, he telephoned me in those days. We didn't have email. But he came and he telephoned me, wanted an appointment because he had this problem. And nobody could help him. He'd been to psychologists and he'd been to doctors and he'd been to all kinds of things, and no one could help him. And of course, I often, when I used to do private counseling, I would often get, the last desperate people. I'll never forget. Time of the appointment, knocked on the door, I said, come in. He opened the door, looked at me, his hand was on his wrist. He said, what if my heart stops? No, hello, hi, my name is so-and-so. Opened the door and said, what if my heart stops? Well, I was startled. So I just said the first thing that came to my mind. What if it doesn't? And he looked stunned for a moment. Then he had this big smile and he said, yeah, right, thank you. Out he went. Came back later and took some classes, worked for me for a while. When I had met him, he had lost his job, lost his girlfriend, dropped out of university. After that statement, and spending a little more time, but it was primarily that shift of focus. Why he went back, and now he's a master of what he does. Successfully married, he's got a beautiful job, he's several degrees. We still correspond once in a while, and he'll send me an email with some positive statement or something, usually pertinent to the point. But the main thing is, he was locked into this idea of powerlessness. He was so focused, and it just took something to jog him out of that focus. And the shift was so surprising to him that he kept following it, which was a good thing. The last principle is just one that we'll finish with, and this is that effectiveness is the measure of truth. And we've talked about this as we've been talking. And we go back to what happened with Kana again, briefly. Because Kana tried everything. He tried this, and he tried this, and he tried this, and he tried this. And finally he tried something that worked. A lot of people get stuck when they're trying to do something and trying to change something, trying to use their mind as best they can. They get stuck in a plan. Now, a plan is the way of carrying out some activities and behaviors toward your goal, toward your purpose. A lot of people live without goals and purpose. Nothing wrong with that, but here we're talking about it. But the plan is just something you make up as a way of getting to where you want to be. There's nothing whatsoever sacred about a plan. The idea that effectiveness is the measure of truth is the thing that works is the thing that works, regardless of the plan. So if your current plan for what you're trying to accomplish isn't working, change the plan. Okay? Do it differently or do something different. And that's going to give you a breakthrough, and that's going to help you get to where you want to be. And so that's the discussion about this topic.
The momentum of the idea, and how it seemed to have worked. So
strong Akka fields, right?
And obviously we realized that, whoops, something's out of balance.
Yes.
But there's so much momentum there. What happens when the old idea suddenly collapses?
Well, let's hope it doesn't suddenly collapse, okay? That would be rough, okay? It could, but that's not what we want. What we want is a lot more people thinking and focusing on alternative ways to produce energy that do not require destruction. The energy's there. Let's give you some example. You know, most of our current technology is based on a few selected ideas by a few experimenters, starting mainly around the 1700s. There were hundreds and hundreds of experimenters going off in all kinds of different directions, and our current society is based on the ideas that were selected of a very few. And then people have been tremendously creative with those very few ideas. But some of them are kind of running out of their usefulness. There were lots of others. Let's take a simple example. We have radio waves going out all around the world. Okay? And radio waves within certain frequencies are perfectly natural, and there they are. It is possible, just as an example, this technology exists, but nobody does anything with it so far. Although I've heard some people are starting to think of it again, and that is FM radio motors. I have a book that tells you exactly how to make one. But the field is so strong, I've never opened the book. Okay? But the technology does exist. And now it's a very small motor, and it doesn't do very much. But that's only because nobody's been working at developing it. The first electric motors didn't do anything either. Okay? All we need is somebody to invent an amplifier. And you've got all this free energy existing right now, and it's known that it can be converted into usable energy. That's just one small example. So yeah, but we need more people thinking of this, expecting this, wanting it, loving it, in order to strengthen that field. And then you watch the inventions start to come out. And the stronger that field is, the faster the change will be. Because the less benefit the other change will have. Now, if we start thinking in terms, again, this is the opinions we can have. You say, oh, well, you know, big money and big oil and big banks, and they'll stop us. Well, you just stopped yourself with that opinion. Okay? Forget about that. Focus on what you want, not on what you don't want, or what you're afraid of, or what you think may happen. The future doesn't exist yet. You've got to focus on what you want to help strengthen a particular field and to help tune yourself into it so you benefit from it too.